I stood in the doorway, still wearing my apron. My family was already eating the Thanksgiving dinner I'd spent all day cooking. There wasn't a place set for me at the table, not a single empty chair. My turkey, my stuffing, my cranberry sauce that took hours to make, all being enjoyed without me. My grandkids were laughing, using my special china plates, the ones my mother gave me that I only bring out for special occasions. My signature sweet potato casserole with the extra marshmallows that David loves was half gone already. No one even noticed me standing there, watching them eat the food I'd made with my own hands. Deborah looked up mid-bite and saw me. Her eyes didn't show surprise or guilt, just annoyance at being caught. She didn't even put down her fork. She just kept chewing, like finding me standing there was an inconvenience rather than something to feel bad about. David barely glanced up from his plate, shoveling in another bite of turkey. Rebecca stared down at her lap, refusing to meet my eyes. That's when I knew. This wasn't some mistake or misunderstanding. They had deliberately started Thanksgiving dinner without me, the person who had cooked every single dish on that table. My hands started shaking so bad I nearly dropped the warm pumpkin pie I was holding. My chest felt tight, like someone was squeezing my lungs. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat as I stood there, invisible to my own family, still clutching the dessert I'd woken up early to bake for them. I had gotten up at 5 a.m., while the house was still dark and quiet. I'd shuffled to the kitchen in my slippers and turned on the oven, the way I had every Thanksgiving for the past 30 years. I'd been cooking for hours while they slept in, timing everything perfectly so it would all be hot and ready at the same time. I'd made everything exactly how they liked it. Turkey brined overnight so it wouldn't be dry. Stuffing made from scratch with the sausage that David loved. Careful to leave out the celery that triggers his allergy. Green bean casserole with extra fried onions on top, because that's what my grandkids always ask for. Homemade rolls shaped perfectly by hand. I'd even made 2 kinds of cranberry sauce. The smooth kind for Deborah, and the chunky kind for Rebecca. I had just stepped away to get the pumpkin pie from the kitchen counter when they must have decided to sit down and start without me. I was gone maybe 2 minutes, just long enough to grab the pie and the whipped cream I'd made from scratch. That's how little time it took for them to forget about me. Ever been taken for granted by the people you love most? Share your experience below. Mom, we were just hungry, so we decided to start, Deborah said with a dismissive wave of her hand. But her tone gave her away. This wasn't about hunger. This was calculated, planned. I could see it in the way she barely tried to sound convincing. Looking around the table, I noticed something even worse. The chairs were all pushed together tightly, with no gap where my chair should have been. They had rearranged the seating so there was literally no place for me. My own dining room table, and they had made sure there was no room for me at it. I thought you'd already eaten while you were cooking, David mumbled, not even looking up from his phone that he'd placed next to his plate. He stabbed another piece of turkey with his fork, the turkey I had started preparing yesterday. That's when I noticed Rebecca's phone on the table beside her plate. The screen was lit up with a group text from Deborah to both her siblings. I could read it clearly from where I stood. Let's just start eating. Mom won't mind. Better to ask forgiveness than permission, right? And then a laughing emoji. They had planned this. Deliberately excluded me from my own Thanksgiving dinner. I placed the pie down on the counter beside me, my appetite completely gone. Without saying a word, I turned and walked out of the dining room. No one called after me. No one apologized. I heard the clinking of silverware continue as I left, as if my exit was just a minor interruption to their meal. I went to the bathroom and locked the door behind me. With shaking hands, I untied my mother's apron, the one with the embroidered turkeys around the border that I only use on Thanksgiving. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, really seeing myself for the first time in years. The worn lines around my eyes, the gray hair I never had time to color anymore, the automatic smile lines that stayed on my face even when I wasn't happy. A war raged inside me. Part of me wanted to march back in there and demand respect. Flip the table over like in those dramatic movies. Make them see me. But the other part, the part that had spent decades being the peacekeeper, the one who smoothed things over, who put everyone else first, that part was winning. That part was saying, don't make a scene, don't ruin their holiday, It's not that big a deal. I could almost hear Jim's voice in my head. My late husband would never have let this happen. He always made sure I had the best seat at the table, always served me first, always thanked me in front of everyone for the meal. Nobody treats my Michelle like she's invisible, he used to say. The pain of missing him crashed over me again, 6 years after his death, sharper than it had been in months. When I returned to the dining room, the conversation awkwardly stuttered, then resumed. I tried to pull up a chair from the living room, but there was no space. Deborah had spread out serving dishes strategically around the table, taking up every inch of space. I stood there holding my chair, like a child in a game of musical chairs after the music stops. Mom, why don't you just relax in the kitchen? You've been working so hard all day, Deborah suggested, her voice sickeningly sweet. We can bring you a plate. She made it sound like she was doing me a favor, like being banished to eat alone in the kitchen was some kind of reward for cooking all day. I'd like to sit with my family for Thanksgiving dinner, I said, my voice coming out smaller than I wanted. David mumbled something about moving over, but didn't actually move. Rebecca said nothing, just pushed food around her plate. Deborah quickly changed the subject to her son's soccer tournament, and just like that, I was dismissed. I retreated to the kitchen, feeling a strange numbness spread through me as I heard their conversation and laughter resume literally seconds after I left the room. Like I'd never been there at all. Like I didn't matter. From the kitchen doorway, I watched Deborah taking photos of the table with her phone, carefully angling the camera so you couldn't see the empty space where I should have been sitting. For Instagram, she announced, making everyone smile. I noticed she had arranged her plate to show off my home-cooked food perfectly for her photo, food she didn't acknowledge I had made. Grandma Deborah, did you make the stuffing? It's so good, I heard my grandson ask. Deborah smiled and said, Family recipe, sweetie. She didn't mention that it was my recipe, that I had taught her how to make it, that I was the one who actually made it today while she slept in until 11. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Jessica, my best friend since college. How's Thanksgiving going? Are the kids behaving themselves? She asked. For a moment, I just stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. For the first time ever, I didn't send back my usual, everything's wonderful. Instead, I typed, they started eating without me. There's no place for me at the table. Seeing the words on the screen made it real in a way that standing in the doorway hadn't. I pressed send before I could change my mind. Jessica's response came immediately. What? That's not okay, Michelle. I'm coming over. Be there in 20. Another text followed. Don't let them make you feel crazy for being hurt. This is not normal. Reading her words, I felt the first flutter of validation. Maybe I wasn't overreacting. Maybe this really was as bad as it felt. From my spot in the kitchen, I really looked at my family, really watched them. Deborah was at the head of the table, my spot, where I'd always sat. She was directing the conversation, telling everyone when to pass dishes, subtly controlling everything. David was just going along with it, the path of least resistance as usual. Rebecca occasionally glanced toward the kitchen, a flash of guilt on her face before she'd turn back to Deborah with an eager-to-please smile. I watched my grandchildren, too. When little Emma dropped her napkin, Deborah told her, Go ask Grandma to get you a new one. Not please or would you mind, just an expectation that I was there to serve. I realized with a sinking feeling that the kids were being taught to see me as the help, not as their grandmother who deserved a place at the table. Mom, we're ready for coffee and dessert, Deborah called out, not bothering to turn around or phrase it as a question. No one moved to help or even to clear their plates. They just sat there, waiting for me to serve them. Again, I moved around the kitchen mechanically, getting dessert plates, cutting the pie I'd made, brewing coffee. But my mind was cataloging all the similar moments I'd let slide over the years. All the times I'd been treated like staff rather than family. All the times I'd told myself it wasn't worth making a fuss about. How would you feel if your family did this to you? Tell me in the comments. Last Christmas flashed into my mind. I'd spent weeks decorating the house, buying and wrapping gifts, planning the perfect menu. Then Deborah had swept in and criticized my choice of table setting, rearranged my centerpiece, and positioned herself in all the family photos while I was busy in the kitchen, By the time I'd joined them, she was opening her children's gifts and taking credit for the ones I'd bought. "Look what Grandma got you," she'd said, meaning herself, not me. Then there was Easter, when they'd taken the family photo while I was glazing the ham. "You were busy, Mom, and we didn't want to bother you," David had explained when I found out later. My face wasn't in a single family picture that day. It was like I hadn't even been there. I started noticing a pattern. I was invited to family events, but always with the expectation that I'd be the one cooking and serving. They'd seat me at the far end of the table, away from the main conversation. By the time I'd finish helping the grandkids with their food and making sure everyone had what they needed, the conversation had moved on without me. Since Jim died, I realized, I'd been reduced to a function rather than a person. I wasn't Mom or Grandma anymore. I was just the woman who cooked and cleaned and served. The woman who hosted but never really participated. The woman who gave everything and received nothing in return. My hands were shaking so badly as I sliced the pie that I nearly dropped a piece. The slice fell messily onto the plate, the filling oozing out a bit onto the ceramic. Nothing major, just not as picture-perfect as my usual serving. "Mom, you're making a mess," Deborah said sharply when I brought it to the table. "The pie's falling apart." Not, "Thank you for making dessert," or "This looks delicious." Just criticism of the one tiny flaw in my hours of work. I noticed David's son using my mother's antique china like it was plastic dinnerware from the dollar store, banging his fork against the delicate pattern. These plates had survived 4 generations, and I'd specifically asked everyone to be careful with them, but no one was paying attention. No one cared what mattered to me. I remembered unwrapping those dishes with my mother when I was just a teenager. "Someday you'll use these for your own family," she'd told me. "They'll sit around your table and feel the love that comes from sharing meals together." The memory made my heart ache. This isn't what she'd meant. This isn't what family was supposed to be. Deborah was positioning everyone for another photo, this time with dessert. "Mom, can you move? You're blocking the light," she said when I briefly stepped into the dining room. Not, "Mom, join the picture." Just, "Mom, get out of the way." I stepped back into the kitchen, invisible again. My eyes fell on the Thanksgiving tablecloth I'd embroidered by hand years ago, with each family member's name stitched along the border. There was a fresh cranberry stain over my name, while someone had placed a serving dish directly on top of where I'd embroidered, "Family is love's greatest blessing." The irony wasn't lost on me. I looked around my home, really seeing how they'd taken it over. My living room furniture had been pushed against the wall without asking me. Someone had changed the music I'd selected to something else. There were coats thrown over my special quilt instead of hung in the closet. Small things, maybe, but they all sent the same message. What I wanted didn't matter. I remembered Deborah's dismissive, "We all agreed," when I'd questioned the Christmas plans last year, but I hadn't been asked. They'd made decisions about gatherings in my home without including me in the conversation. I was just expected to go along with whatever they decided. When David called for a second piece of pie, I didn't immediately jump to serve him. I stood in the kitchen, just staring at the pie, not moving. It was such a small act of resistance, but it felt enormous. For perhaps the first time in years, I was not responding instantly to a request from my children. A strange tension filled the air as they noticed my hesitation. There was a moment of awkward silence. Then Deborah's voice, with an edge to it, "Mom, David wants more pie." Not a question, a command. The spell broke, and I found myself cutting another slice, hating myself a little for giving in so easily. In the quiet of the kitchen, I counted up the hours I'd spent preparing for today. 15 hours of shopping, cooking, cleaning, and setting up. And in return, I'd received 0 minutes of appreciation, 0 minutes of being treated like a member of the family rather than the help. No one had even thanked me for the meal. Not one person had commented on how moist the turkey was, or how fluffy the mashed potatoes were, or how the cranberry sauce had just the right balance of sweet and tart. They were consuming it all eagerly, but acknowledging the work? That apparently wasn't necessary. "So, Mom," David called from the table, his mouth still full of my food, "for Christmas dinner, I was thinking we should do prime rib instead of ham this year. Emma doesn't really like ham. He wasn't asking if I was willing to cook a more expensive, more difficult cut of meat. He was telling me what I would be making for them next. I watched Rebecca mimic Deborah's dismissive hand wave when one of the grandkids asked if they could talk to me. "Grandma's busy," she said, in exactly the same tone Deborah used with me. It hurt to see how the pattern was spreading, teaching the next generation to see me as less than. As I mentally calculated the cost of this Thanksgiving meal, nearly $300 that I'd spent without complaint from my fixed income, I remembered Deborah questioning why I needed to waste money on fresh herbs when dried would do. The same Deborah who was now posting pictures of my herb-roasted turkey on her Instagram without acknowledgement. My phone buzzed again. "Jessica, I'm outside. Come out if you can. You deserve a break." My heart leapt at the escape route. A way out of this house that no longer felt like mine when my family was in it. "I'm going out for a bit," I announced, untying my apron and hanging it up. The conversation at the table stopped abruptly. All heads turned toward me with expressions of shock. I might as well have announced I was flying to the moon. "But what about the dishes?" Deborah asked, gesturing to the pile in the sink. "And we still need more coffee." Her tone made it clear. My job wasn't done. How dare I try to leave before my shift was over? "The dishes can wait," I said quietly, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "I'm sure whoever ate the food can handle cleaning up afterward." It was the most direct I'd been in years. I felt a tiny flame of pride flicker inside me. As I walked out my front door to Jessica's waiting car, I felt like I was breaking through an invisible wall. My legs were shaky, my heart racing, but with each step away from the house, my breathing got easier. I hadn't realized how suffocating it had become in there until I was out. The warm light from Jessica's car looked more inviting than the cold brightness of my dining room, despite the house being full of family. Sometimes a full house can be the loneliest place in the world when no one there really sees you. Jessica didn't pester me with questions as we drove. She just reached over and squeezed my hand. That simple gesture of support nearly broke me. When was the last time someone had touched me with kindness, rather than just to get my attention to ask for something? We ended up at a little diner that was open on Thanksgiving. Jessica ordered us both coffee and a slice of pie. Nowhere near as good as mine, but somehow it tasted better because I was being served instead of serving others. "They started eating without me," I finally said, my voice cracking. "My own children. They deliberately didn't leave a place for me at the table. For Thanksgiving dinner that I cooked." Saying it out loud to someone else made the tears finally come. I covered my face with my hands, decades of suppressed hurt finally finding a way out. "Michelle, that's not okay," Jessica said firmly, passing me a napkin. "That's not normal family behavior. That's not how people treat someone they respect and love." Hearing her say it, giving a name to what I'd been feeling, was like lancing a wound. Painful, but necessary for healing to begin. "What do you think she should do next? Drop your ideas below." "I've wanted to say something for years," Jessica admitted. "I've watched how they treat you, especially since Jim died, but I was afraid of overstepping, of losing your friendship if I criticized your kids. I should have spoken up sooner. They don't see me as a person anymore," I said, the realization crystallizing as I spoke. "Deborah especially. It's like I'm just equipment, the cooking and cleaning machine. Useful when functioning properly, but not something you need to consider beyond that." "Have you seen Deborah's social media?" Jessica asked carefully. When I shook my head, she pulled out her phone. "Look at how she presents herself online. Every family gathering, she positions herself as the matriarch. Your work, your home, your recipes, she takes credit for it all." For the first time, I looked at Deborah's Instagram page. There were already photos from today's Thanksgiving. My table, my food, my family, with a caption reading, "Hosted another beautiful Thanksgiving for the family. Blessed, cheer hostess with the mostess." No mention of me. Not in the text, not in the photos. I had been completely erased. As I scrolled back through her previous posts, I saw the pattern. Easter, Christmas, birthdays, dozens of events at my house, with my cooking, but presented as if they were all her doing. In the few photos where I did appear, I was always in the background, usually serving food or cleaning up. never seated with the family, never presented as the heart of the gathering. "Michelle, they've been taking advantage of your generous nature," Jessica said gently. "You've been letting them walk all over you because you don't want to cause trouble. But by never establishing consequences, you've taught them it's okay to treat you this way." "I don't want to punish my own children," I protested, though the words sounded hollow even to me. Was it really punishing them to expect basic respect? "It's not punishment," Jessica said firmly. "It's teaching people how to treat you. It's standing up for your own worth. Would you let anyone treat your kids the way they're treating you?" By the time we returned to my house, everyone was gone. They hadn't even texted to check if I was okay. The kitchen was a disaster. Dirty dishes piled in the sink, food left out to spoil, spills not wiped up. They'd taken all the leftover turkey and stuffing, but left me the mess. My grocery receipt was still on the counter, a $295 reminder of what this day had cost me. I picked up a serving dish, empty, scraped clean, and felt a surge of anger. Not even a plate of leftovers had been set aside for me. I hadn't had a single bite of the meal I'd spent all day cooking. On the coffee table, I found Deborah's notebook, apparently forgotten in their hasty departure. I shouldn't have looked, but something compelled me to open it. Inside were detailed plans for Christmas. At my house, of course. A menu with assignments next to each item. Mom, turkey, stuffing, potatoes, gravy, pies, sides. Everyone else had minimal contributions like bring ice or pick up rolls from store. There were also notes critiquing previous gatherings. "Mom put too much sage in stuffing last year. Tell Mom we need more dessert options. Make sure Mom doesn't forget the cranberry sauce this time." As if I was an employee receiving a performance review rather than a mother who voluntarily cooked for her family. That was the moment something broke, or maybe healed, inside me. The last of my guilt about standing up for myself vanished, replaced by a righteous anger I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. My hands stopped shaking. My vision cleared. I suddenly knew I couldn't continue like this. I took off my Thanksgiving apron and hung it in the closet instead of keeping it ready for next time. I changed out of the nice clothes I'd worn for a dinner I never got to attend and put on my most comfortable sweater and pants. Small acts of rebellion, but they felt significant. Jessica helped me clean the kitchen, something no one in my family had offered to do. As we worked, we talked about how traditions had morphed into obligations and then into exploitation, how my desire to nurture my family had been weaponized against me, how I'd been diminished in my own home. At 10:30 that night, a text from Deborah finally arrived. "Hope you had a nice time with Jessica. Don't forget we need to finalize the Christmas menu by next week. Remember David wants prime rib this year." No acknowledgement of their behavior, no apology, just more demands. For the first time ever, I didn't immediately text back. I set my phone down and walked away from it. The small act of not responding to her directive felt like shrugging off a heavy backpack I'd been carrying for years. Jessica stayed over that night, sleeping in my guest room. Having someone in my home who actually saw me, who treated me like a person of value rather than a service provider, was a stark contrast to how I'd felt earlier with my own children. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The hurt was still there, but it was overshadowed by something new. Purpose. I didn't just feel angry or sad anymore. I felt determined, ready to fix what had been broken in my relationships with my children. Jessica and I sat at my kitchen table, where I could actually sit and enjoy a meal for once, and made a plan. Not a plan for revenge, but a plan for establishing new boundaries. A plan for teaching my adult children how to treat me with the respect I deserved. I started by rearranging my living room, putting my favorite reading chair in the spot where Deborah always insisted on sitting. I moved family photos, giving prime position to ones that actually included me instead of just my children and grandchildren. I picked up a family portrait from before Jim died. In that photo, I was centered, valued, included. My children looked at me with respect in their eyes, not just expectation. It was a visual reminder of what healthy family dynamics had looked like once upon a time. That's when I noticed my spare house key was missing from the hook by the door. How long had it been gone? I suddenly realized why things in my house were sometimes moved between visits. why food would disappear from my freezer, why Deborah always arrived early to family gatherings and was already making herself at home when I returned from errands. They had been coming and going from my house without my knowledge or permission. I called a locksmith right then. "I need to change all the locks," I said firmly, "as soon as possible." When he asked if I'd lost my keys, I simply said, "No, I've found my backbone." It felt good to make a joke, to find a moment of lightness in the heavy realization of how many boundaries had been crossed. The locksmith arrived that afternoon. As he worked, I felt a strange mix of guilt and liberation. Part of me still wondered if I was overreacting. The other part wished I'd done this years ago. "Should we tell them about the locks?" Jessica asked as we watched the locksmith drive away. I shook my head. "Let them find out when they try to let themselves in without asking," I said. "That's exactly the lesson they need to learn. Would you have the courage to stand up for yourself like this? Let me know." The next day, I got a text from David. "Hey, Mom, we're coming over tomorrow at 3 to talk about the Christmas menu. Deborah's bringing her planner." Not asking if I was available. Not acknowledging anything unusual had happened. Just telling me when they'd be arriving at my house, as if their schedule was the only one that mattered. I texted back carefully, "I'll see what my schedule looks like." Not a yes, not a no. Just a gentle reminder that I had a life and plans of my own that needed to be considered. His confused response, 3 dots appearing and disappearing several times before a simple, "okay," showed how unexpected even this small boundary was. Over the next few days, Jessica helped me develop a plan for Christmas. I would still host. I did love having everyone together in my home. But things would be different this year. Much different. I started making notes about exactly what I was willing to do and what I expected from others. We practiced what I would say when they pushed back. Jessica played the role of Deborah, mimicking her dismissive tone perfectly. "Mom, you know I don't cook. That's your thing." I practiced responding calmly but firmly. "Everyone contributes to Christmas dinner this year, or we can move the gathering elsewhere. It's up to you." I was nervous about the confrontation to come. My hands still shook sometimes when I thought about setting boundaries with my children, but the determination I'd felt that morning after Thanksgiving didn't fade. If anything, it grew stronger as I realized how long I'd been allowing myself to be used. The day they were supposed to come over for Christmas planning, I heard Deborah's key in the lock, except it didn't work anymore. There was confusion on the porch, the sound of the doorknob jiggling, then finally a knock. When I opened the door, the surprise on their faces at having to be let into my house was almost comical. I didn't automatically step aside as I usually did. I stood in the doorway, making them wait to be invited in. Another small boundary. Another tiny reclaiming of my space and dignity. "Come in," I finally said, moving aside but staying centered in my own entryway. They filed in, already looking confused by the changes they could see. The furniture rearranged. My cookbook collection moved from the kitchen to a prominent bookshelf in the living room. The family photos rearranged to include more images of me and Jim. My home was starting to feel like mine again. Deborah immediately tried to take charge, pulling out her notebook and pen. "Okay, so for Christmas dinner, I was thinking we should stick with tradition, but add a few new—" "Actually," I interrupted, my heart racing but my voice steady, "I'd like to discuss how we're going to handle Christmas this year." The 3 of them looked at me with identical expressions of confusion. I rarely interrupted. I virtually never directed the conversation. "I'm happy to host Christmas again," I continued. "But this year we're going to share the cooking responsibilities. I've made a list of dishes, and I'd like each of you to choose 2 or 3 that you'll be responsible for preparing." The shocked silence that followed would have been funny if it hadn't been so sad. The idea that they might have to contribute to a meal beyond showing up to eat it was apparently revolutionary. "But Mom, you always do all the cooking," David finally said, his tone suggesting I was breaking some sacred contract. "That's how it works." "That's how it worked," I corrected gently. "But I'm getting older, and cooking everything myself is too much for me now." It wasn't entirely true. I was perfectly capable of cooking the whole meal. But it was an excuse they might accept better than, "I'm tired of being taken advantage of." "We can just order food," Deborah suggested quickly. Then you don't have to cook, but we can still have it here. The unstated part was clear. She still wanted to use my house, my dishes, my atmosphere, just without having to contribute anything herself. That's not what I'm suggesting, I said, keeping my voice calm but firm. Christmas dinner is about family cooking together. If you don't want to cook, that's absolutely fine. We can have Christmas somewhere else this year. I let that sink in for a moment. Or we can all contribute dishes to the meal. It's your choice. To my surprise, Rebecca spoke up. I think that's fair, she said quietly, not looking at Deborah. Mom's been doing all the work for years. We can help out. It was the first crack in their unified front, and I felt a surge of hope that at least one of my children might be open to change. But what about the kids? Deborah tried next, her voice taking on the manipulative tone she used when she wanted to get her way. They expect Christmas at Grandma's. They'll be so disappointed. The kids will be happy wherever the family is together, I responded, prepared for this tactic. And wouldn't it be nice for them to see their parents contributing to the family meal? To learn that holidays are about everyone giving, not just one person serving everyone else? By the end of the meeting, they had reluctantly agreed to my terms. Deborah would bring appetizers and a side dish. David would handle the prime rib he'd been so insistent about. Rebecca would make desserts and a vegetable dish. I would make the mashed potatoes, gravy, and rolls. The tension in the room was thick, but I felt lighter than I had in years. After they left, I sat in my rearranged living room, shaking from the adrenaline dump but proud of myself. A mixture of anxiety and empowerment swirled in my chest. Had I done the right thing? Would they be angry? Would this change our relationship forever? But beneath those worries was a bedrock of certainty. I couldn't go back to how things were before. I deserved better. The week before Christmas was a test of my resolve. Several times my phone rang with questions that were thinly veiled attempts to get me to take over their cooking assignments. Mom, where do you buy the good mushrooms for the stuffing? David didn't even have stuffing on his list. Mom, exactly how many people are coming so I know how much to make? Information Deborah already had. Old habits died hard. Both their habit of delegating to me and my habit of stepping in to help. But I held firm, offering advice but not volunteering to do the work for them. Each time I successfully maintained a boundary, I felt a little stronger, a little more sure of myself. On Christmas morning, I woke early, but not to start cooking at dawn as I usually would. Instead, I took my time getting dressed. I put on a new outfit I'd bought myself as a Christmas present. I arranged the dining room, setting the table with my good china, and making sure there was a place for me at the head of the table where I belonged. My family arrived with their promised dishes, but I could tell from the store packaging and the restaurant containers that minimal effort had gone into most of their contributions. Deborah's homemade appetizers were clearly from the deli counter. David's prime rib looked suspiciously like the pre-seasoned one from the grocery store butcher. Only Rebecca had actually made her assigned dishes from scratch. I didn't comment on the obvious shortcuts. This was a first step, and I hadn't expected them to transform overnight. What mattered was that they had to make at least some effort, had to acknowledge that the meal didn't magically appear without someone's labor. When Deborah tried to rearrange the seating, moving my place setting to the far end of the table as she usually did, I calmly moved it back. I'd like to sit here today, I said, my voice pleasant but firm. The look on her face was priceless, confusion mixed with the dawning realization that the usual rules weren't applying anymore. The meal began awkwardly. The food was mismatched. Some items overdone, others barely warm. Nothing timed to come together the way I would have orchestrated it. The conversation was stilted, with Deborah trying repeatedly to take charge, but being met with my quiet resistance. Grandma, why is Christmas dinner different this year? Emma asked innocently, noticing the change in atmosphere and food quality. The table went silent, all eyes on me. This was the moment of truth. Because this year, we're all contributing to the meal instead of just one person doing all the work, I said simply. That's what family is about. Everyone giving something, not just taking. I kept my voice kind, but I didn't soften the truth. The children, at least, deserved honesty. Deborah couldn't let that stand unchallenged. Well, the food was better when you made it all, Mom. she said with a little laugh that didn't reach her eyes. Maybe next year we should go back to tradition. That was the opening I'd been waiting for. I set down my fork and looked directly at her. I'd like to talk about tradition, I said calmly, and about respect and gratitude and what it means to be family. For the next few minutes, I spoke from the heart, without raising my voice or making accusations. I talked about how I'd felt excluded from my own Thanksgiving table, how I'd watched my contributions being taken for granted year after year, how I'd been treated as a servant rather than a mother or grandmother, how I'd found myself erased from family photos and social media posts. I calmly shared specific examples that couldn't be denied. The Thanksgiving betrayal, the Christmas where Deborah took credit for my gifts, the Easter family photo I wasn't in, the countless times I'd been seated away from conversations. I didn't raise my voice, but I didn't sugarcoat anything either. When was the last time any of you thanked me for cooking, or offered to help clean up, or asked what I wanted instead of just telling me what you expected? I asked. The silence that followed was answer enough. David shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Mom, I didn't realize… He started, then stopped when he saw my expression. I guess I've been pretty self-centered, he finally admitted. I just got used to you taking care of everything. I didn't think about how it felt for you. Rebecca had tears in her eyes. I'm so sorry, Mom, she whispered. I saw what was happening sometimes, but I never spoke up. I just went along with it because it was easier. Her honesty surprised me, a small ray of hope in the tense atmosphere. They never expected her to fight back. Are you shocked by their reaction? Comment now. Deborah's face had turned stony during my speech. This is ridiculous, she snapped, standing up abruptly. I'm not going to sit here and be attacked on Christmas. She grabbed her purse and her children's coats. Kids, we're leaving, now. Her husband looked embarrassed but followed her lead, mumbling an apology as he left. Interestingly, he left the children's presents behind, a sign that perhaps he didn't fully support her dramatic exit. After Deborah stormed out, something unexpected happened. David, Rebecca, and I actually talked. Really talked. Maybe for the first time in years. Without Deborah's controlling presence, they seemed more willing to hear me, to acknowledge their part and how I'd been treated. Let me serve dessert, I said, when our conversation reached a natural pause. I brought out the special chocolate cake I'd made, the one thing I'd prepared beyond my assigned dishes, a small concession to my nurturing instincts. But this time, the giving was my choice, not an expectation, and that made all the difference. The rest of Christmas evening was smaller than planned, but more meaningful. We played board games. The grandchildren included me in their activities instead of just running to me when they needed something. David helped clear the table without being asked. Small changes, but significant ones. After everyone left, I sat alone in my living room, looking at the Christmas tree lights and reflecting on what had happened. The confrontation I'd feared for so long was over, and I had survived. More than survived. I felt stronger, more myself than I had in years. The family dynamic had shifted, and while I knew there would be challenges ahead, I couldn't go back to the way things were before. I wouldn't. The new year brought new experiences. Jessica hosted a gathering at her house, and for the first time in forever, I attended a holiday event as a guest, not a server. I brought one dish, not an entire meal. I sat and chatted the whole time, never once jumping up to refill drinks or clear plates. It felt strange, but wonderful. Rebecca reached out more in the weeks that followed. We met for coffee, just the two of us, and she apologized again, more fully this time. I've been thinking about how we treated you, especially after Dad died, she said. We took advantage of your kindness. I want to do better. Her honesty touched me deeply. David surprised me with a thoughtful text message. Mom, I've been reflecting on how I neglected you after Dad passed. I got wrapped up in my own life and didn't think about how lonely you must have been. I'm sorry. Can we have dinner next week? Just us? It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. I responded warmly to both Rebecca and David, but I didn't immediately fall back into old patterns. I kept my boundaries firm while leaving room for our relationships to heal. I'd love to have dinner, I told David. Let's meet at that new restaurant downtown. Not my house, not me cooking. A neutral place where we could begin rebuilding on more equal footing. Deborah remained resistant. Her social media posts became passive-aggressive hints about ungrateful mothers and family traditions being destroyed. I chose not to engage with these thinly veiled attacks. Her anger didn't define me anymore. I could acknowledge her feelings without taking responsibility for them. By February, we had our first post-Christmas family dinner, at a restaurant, my suggestion. Neutral territory where no one could fall into the old pattern of me serving everyone else. It was fascinating to watch how differently my family behaved when they had to acknowledge service from the waitstaff, when they had to say please and thank you for every dish and drink refill. When Easter approached, I declined to host. I think we should rotate family gatherings, I suggested. Rebecca, would you like to host Easter this year? The look of panic on her face was almost comical, but she agreed. And when she called 3 times that week with questions about cooking and preparations, I offered advice without taking over. Teaching, not doing. Supporting, not serving. I started reclaiming spaces in my home that had been solely dedicated to family service. The guest room that had become storage for holiday decorations became my art studio. I took a painting class, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for, when all my energy went into caring for others. I had a special conversation with my grandchildren about love and how we show it. Cooking for people is one way to show love, I explained, but so is spending time with them, listening to them, respecting their feelings. Everyone in a family should show love, not just one person. They absorbed this easily, without the resistance their parents had shown. Slowly, I noticed changes in how my family treated me. David would bring coffee when he visited, a small gesture that showed he was thinking about what I might want. Rebecca called to check in just to talk, not to ask for something. Even Deborah's children started thanking me specifically for things I did for them, though their mother remained cool and distant. Has this story inspired you to set better boundaries? Share this with someone who needs to hear it. The journey wasn't easy. There were days I questioned myself, wondered if I was being selfish or asking too much. Old habits of putting myself last were hard to break. But every time I started to backslide into people-pleasing, I remembered that Thanksgiving, standing in the doorway, invisible to my own family, no place set for me at my own table. The memory strengthened my resolve to never allow myself to be so devalued again. Mother's Day was the real test. For years, my children had celebrated the day with a card and flowers, while still expecting me to host and cook the meal. This year was different. They took me to a beautiful restaurant, where David had made reservations weeks in advance. They gave me thoughtful gifts that reflected my new interests. For the first time, Mother's Day felt like it was actually about honoring me, not just going through motions while still expecting my service. You stand straighter now, Jessica observed one day as we walked through the park. You speak more directly. You don't do that thing anymore where you apologize before stating an opinion. I hadn't noticed these physical changes, but she was right. Setting boundaries hadn't just changed my relationships. It had changed me. Sometimes I felt grief for all the years I'd spent being taken for granted. All the family gatherings where I'd been more staff than family. All the times I'd swallowed hurt rather than making a fuss. But I refused to regret. Regret looks backward, and I was focused on moving forward, on building relationships based on mutual respect rather than one-sided giving. 1 year after that painful Thanksgiving, I hosted the holiday again. But everything was different. Everyone contributed dishes. David arrived early to help set up. Rebecca brought her famous cranberry sauce that she'd perfected with practice. Even Deborah brought an elaborate dessert, though she still struggled to fully acknowledge the changed dynamic. Most importantly, when we sat down to eat, I took my place at the head of the table, a place that had been set before I even entered the dining room. My plate was filled by others. My glass was kept full. And when my grandson raised his glass in a simple toast, to Grandma, who brings us together, I felt tears spring to my eyes. Not tears of hurt or resentment, but tears of gratitude for how far we'd come. I learned something important through this difficult journey. My worth isn't measured by what I do for others. It isn't defined by my willingness to keep serving even when I'm not appreciated. My worth is inherent. It exists whether I'm cooking a feast or sitting with my feet up, whether I'm giving or receiving, whether I'm serving or being served. True nourishment doesn't come from food, no matter how lovingly prepared. It comes from relationships where everyone gives and everyone receives, where everyone is seen and valued, where love flows in all directions, not just from one person outward. That's the kind of family I'm building now, slower than I'd like sometimes, with setbacks along the way, but moving steadily toward something healthier, something more nourishing for all of us, especially for me.